1967 was a really important day for the country of Guatemala. This day, Miguel Ángel Asturias won the Nobel Prize of Literature. He is the first Guatemalan to win a Nobel Prize and the only Guatemalan to win one in the field of literature. But his story didn't start there. He has affected Guatemala in many distinct ways through his politics, books, and poems. He made large contributions to Guatemala and the way it is today. His books are amongst the most famous published by a Guatemalan. His poetry and books can help us remember the past and contribute to our knowledge regarding Guatemala during a time period where people were ruled by dictators and foreign large companies. His literature can help us remember a time period in which indigenous people were oppressed and discriminated. Not only bad experiences can be remembered through his literature, because with it we can also remember the good things. These include Mayan culture, its legends, and traditions. Son of Ernesto Asturias and Maria Rosales, Miguel Ángel Asturias was born in Guatemala City on October 19, 1899. He lived in Guatemala and his parents were in conflict with the government of Manuel Estrada Cabrera. They disliked Cabrera's ideals and were often persecuted because of helping protesting students. Because of their fights with the government and their persecution, the family of Miguel Ángel Asturias left the city for a couple of years to live in the province. When they returned to Guatemala City, Asturias studied in the Central National Institute for Males. After graduating from school, Miguel Ángel Asturias went to the University of San Carlos, where he studied law and graduated with a thesis called El Problema Social del Indio. His thesis talked about cultural issues that indigenous people had to go through. He says that the problem of racism started way back. The main cause of the issue is that people living in Guatemala come from different places, so this causes the different cultures to clash in multiple problems. In the thesis, he says that the solution to the problem is more racial integration. After graduating, Miguel Ángel Asturias founded the popular University of Guatemala. It was meant to help the lower class, so Asturias wanted this to be a cheap way for people to be able to enter college. On 1923, Miguel Ángel Asturias would leave Guatemala to pursue a degree in political economy at London, England. During this trip, Miguel Ángel Asturias traveled to France and lived there for the next 10 years instead of living in London. While living in France, Miguel Ángel Asturias started studying Mayan culture and religion at the University of Sorbonne in France. Throughout this period, Miguel Ángel Asturias traveled back and forth from France to Guatemala. After teaching in Guatemala for a couple of months, Miguel Ángel Asturias went back to Europe where he published his first book called Leyendas de Guatemala in the city of Madrid, Spain in 1930. The book Leyendas de Guatemala tells 7 legends that take place here in Guatemala. Several of the legends that are written in the book were legends told by the Mayan people back then and were based on the events that occurred in the past, such as the invasion of Mayan villages in Lake Atitlan. Other legends told in this book, like the legend of Kukulkan, are based on Mayan religion. In several of the legends told in this book, Miguel Ángel Asturias compares the Mayan culture and the Spanish culture. The book also contains a lot of magical realism. Each of these legends have very different characters and events, but all of them relate to the Mayan culture in some way. Throughout this book, Asturias is trying to relate to both of his racial classes. Throughout the book, he shows qualities for both the Spanish and the Mayan people, but he relates more to the indigenous. He connects with the Mayan traditions and their stories, but he barely shows any connections to his Spanish descendants. Miguel Ángel Asturias started to write his book called El Señor Presidente from 1923 to 1933 in Paris. El Señor Presidente is based on the dictatorship of Manuel Estrada Cabrera and describes the life of different people under his dictatorship. In the first part of the book, some officers are investigating a murder. They interview several people, including a blind man nicknamed Mosquito. He is blind, but he knows who committed the crime. All of the other people being interviewed are lying, but Mosquito is saying the truth. The auditor believes that Mosquito is lying. Because of this, Mosquito is killed and the body is sent to the cemetery on a wagon. Just this instance of the book shows how unfair the life under a dictatorship was. He describes rigid trials and arbitrary executions throughout the whole book. El Señor Presidente was a way of expressing some of the things Asturias saw throughout Cabrera's presidency. The book Hombres de Maíz was published in Argentina in 1949. The book is based on the lives of Mayan people. It revolves around the oppression that they felt and how big companies and businesses were taking advantage of them, especially the United Fruit Company. It also talks about how the indigenous people felt that these companies were against their core beliefs and that they were slowly eliminating their ancestral traditions, which made many of these people angry and insecure. Like many other books that Miguel Ángel Asturias wrote, it contains a lot of magical realism. This book tries to give a voice to the indigenous people. Miguel Ángel Asturias knew that many people didn't care about the opinions of the indigenous, but he knew it was important that people realized what the government and the foreigners were doing to them. Miguel Ángel Asturias had a lot of issues with several presidencies in Guatemala. He also had issues publishing some of his books, but in the end, he was inspired by this president. Jorge Ubico came to power under changes to the constitution and manipulated elections. He wanted to enhance Guatemala's economy by allying with the United States. He made his presidential term twice as long than it was meant to be. Miguel Ángel Asturias had a lot of problems with Jorge Ubico's presidency. These issues were caused because Jorge Ubico didn't like Asturias' ideologies and because the government closed the university Asturias co-founded, which was the popular University of Guatemala. Miguel Ángel Asturias had returned to Guatemala and decided not to publish El Señor Presidente because of the issues he had with the government of Guatemala. The book wasn't published for 13 years until Guatemala changed presidents. The new president of Guatemala, Juan José Arevalo, had similar ideas to those of Miguel Ángel Asturias because both cared for education and wanted something better for indigenous people. Arevalo implemented laws that helped workers. Some of these are the payment of extra working hours and a short vacation period. He made working hours less than what they were before. He also made minimum wages obligatory. The bond between Arevalo and Asturias strengthened when Arevalo named Miguel Ángel Asturias the ambassador of Mexico. It was in Mexico City where in 1946 he published the book El Señor Presidente. After Arbenz took Arevalo's place, Asturias was named an ambassador by Jacobo Arbenz. This soon ended after the United States overthrew Arbenz. The events that occurred during the presidencies of Jacobo Arbenz and Jorge Ubico inspired Miguel Ángel Asturias to write his book Hombres de Maíz. On December 10, 1967, Miguel Ángel Asturias was awarded with the Nobel Prize of Literature for his book Hombres de Maíz. This award was given to him for his vivid literary achievement deep-rooted in the national traits and the traditions of Indian peoples of Latin America. Miguel Ángel Asturias was honored to become a Nobel Prize winner, and as he said during his speech, "In my case, I became part of the Nobel family, the least known among many that could be chosen." Asturias was also given the Lenin Peace Prize in 1966 for his books, which were considered by many of the Soviet Union anti-imperialist. Miguel Ángel Asturias wasn't a leader because he led an army during a war or because he led protests and revolts. He was a leader at what he did best, using his words to ignite change. Throughout his literature, he argues for the equal treatment of indigenous people and an end to exploitation. He shows the negative impacts of foreign countries in Guatemala, and with his books, he makes sure everyone is clear about how other countries and its own government were taking advantage of Guatemala. Because of his legacy, Mayan people, culture, and traditions are revered worldwide. Asturias' insistence that indigenous people are still human beings still resonates with his readers today. He is remembered here in Guatemala not only through his books, but also through the Miguel Ángel Asturias Cultural Center and the Miguel Ángel Asturias National Prize in Literature.